Hi. For the next 10 minutes or so, I wanted to speak to Paul Verhoeven and Chris Straub of the incredible podcast 28 Plays Later. There will be a link to their site and all that good stuff in the description. This is in response particularly to the latest episode, number 73. They talk about World of Warcraft. They kind of get into how they're both hooked on it. They both really like the game, but they also talk about, Chris brings up how he never liked the Horde, thought they were dumb, and Paul gets a lot into how evil the Undead are and how evil the Horde is and kind of the bad guys. And my primary response here is to the idea of the Horde being evil, and I'm going to focus on the Undead. Mostly because it's a pretty common theme that the Horde are the bad guys, and that the Alliance are the good guys, but it's a narrative that the players seem to be assigning, not necessarily Blizzard itself, and it's especially players who aren't interested in looking too deeply at the lore of the situation. And ultimately, I'm gonna do this because it seems like everywhere I go on the net, it's all Alliance biased, and maybe when I'm done with this, somebody will help point me out to where the people who actually enjoy the Horde are. I don't know, we'll see. So I mostly want to talk about the Undead, as they are positioned as the most obvious bad of the bad guys, but let me make a quick stop off at the Tauren. In the podcast, the Tauren are referred to as good guys who are obligated to care for the Horde because they're next to them. This is a huge diminishment of the Tauren's incredible honor and loyalty. The Tauren are dedicated to the Horde because it was the Horde that allowed them to continue existing. When the Horde reached Kalimdor in Warcraft 3, they were hurting from being lost at sea, and from the losses they'd had in the Isle of the Sea Witch. It was mitigated, or doubled, depending on how you look at it, by the addition of trolls, who also lost many people to the Sea Witch, including Sen'jin, their beloved leader. The Horde still stopped, with all of that, they still stopped long enough to help the Tauren drive back the Centaurs, who were systematically wiping out the Tauren people in territory disputes. That's why the Tauren are loyal to the Horde. They're not some kind of weirdly attached neighbor down the street worrying about them orc kids and their evil raves. They owe their survival to the kindness and mercy of the Horde that took them in and treated them like brothers. And they repay that brotherhood in kind. And the Tauren story is repeated all across the Horde. A downtrodden people were on their last leg, and the Horde reached out and said, hey, we're all brothers here. As opposed to the Alliance, who basically said, hey, we're all fantasy good guys, right? Right? Am I right? Also, aren't we all just so very pretty? Cool, we're a group now. So that brings me nicely to the Undead, the ugliest of the ugly in the Warcraft universe. They're widely considered the evil ones. Personally, I think that's narrow in vision for the Undead. The Undead aren't evil like some cackling villain of a Golden Age comic book, or at least that's not how I think they should be viewed, even if sometimes that's where the writing puts them. But I'll get back to that in a bit here. They're not evil in that way. They're just amoral and immortal. And that can look really evil to outsiders, but when death isn't the end, why would you care about killing some people? Let me back it up a moment and let's look at the Undead in their totality. Until the beginning of the Third War, the humans of Lordaeron were just happily living their lives, right? The Stormwinders were busy back in the south fucking over the hardworking contractors who were trying to build them a city. A crazy old man tried to throw some laundry at King Taranis or warn him of the apocalypse or whatever it is crazy old bird sorcerers do. But Taranis had a pretty cool son, and a daughter who didn't matter until she started following priests around in legions. Seriously, Kaelia Menethil, I want to talk to you and find out what you were doing. Anyway. But that son, that Arthas boy, boy. Skipping ahead a little bit, Arthas returns as the scion of the Lich King and wipes out Lordaeron. Everybody there becomes undead under the thrall of the most powerful psychic on the planet, which was Ner'zhul at the time. But here's what I want to emphasize. The Alliance of Lordaeron had more or less gone its separate ways at that point. The Southerners were back in their rebuilt city, the Gilneans had gone back to their own place and were having a bit of civil strife of their own. The traitor nation was out of the picture, so who were the humans that Arthas killed? They weren't the people of Stormwind, the humans that you play in the game today. So they weren't generic humans, just human. They were the people of Lordaeron. So a year and a half later, when Archimonde is defeated and the Lich King's power wanes to the point where he can just barely control every single mindless being on a continent, so weak, right? The undead who suddenly regained free will were first and foremost the people of Lordaeron. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of neighboring refugees who found themselves in that newly awakened mass, but for the most part, there was no home to retake. They were already home because it was theirs in the first place. But the Alliance took one look at them and said, remember earlier we were saying how pretty we are? I mean, look, do the humans models in this game look like badly shaved gorillas? Yes, but they're relatable, so we let it slide, whatever. Anyway, you equals not pretty, so make with the dead now. We are dead. More dead. More. Now, not only are these people freshly given back their free will, but they're also people who have been robbed of much of their previous identity. Their humanity is stripped away. No longer are they bound by the moral tethers of human society, but they still remember being human. And many of them remember the terrible, terrible things they did when they weren't human. So when the flesh bags come a-running with torch and pitchfork in hand, the undead fight. When the flesh bags scream about returning the land to its rightful people rightfully said, wait, what? And they fought back. And that's because that's what they've been doing ever since. They joined the Horde because they needed allies. They couldn't take the Alliance on their own. Now, I'll freely admit that Blizzard definitely frames the undead as villains more often than not, but everything they do is 100% on brand for the Horde. They're fighting for survival against a world that hates them. Where we start to get judgy is that their idea of acceptable is completely alien to us, because they're not alive. The trappings of being alive don't really interest or concern them. As a species, they're interested in the things a species is, sure. Survival, prosperity, growth. That's why Sylvanas is trying to track down these Valkyrs. Sure, it keeps her alive, but it also allows the undead to propagate as a species. Without the Valkyr, the undead as a people will eventually simply die out. Sylvanas doesn't have the option of starting a Homefront initiative to encourage more babies. She can't give out tax breaks for families with more kids in a military service record. So instead, she has to go bind a god of the Valkyr and force her to give up her secrets. And because Sylvanas is undead, the niceties of humanity that we all understand, like asking permission or asking help, that's all been scraped away. She doesn't ask nicely, she's ruthless, she's single-minded. Hell, the last time she even tried to explain her situation, Garrosh basically told her to die in a fire. She's incentivized to ruthlessness and has precedent for secrecy. It makes sense. I wish that Blizzard could let the nuance of the undead through a bit more often. The type of struggle we're seeing with them is much more clear in the orcs. The orcs are the kind of obvious end of that struggle with barbarism spectrum. I get why people think undead are evil, and even why some people roleplay them as evil. There's a lot of stuff to work with there, but I don't think, that evil is the right tag to put on them. And I think that trying to put them into that evil box is the kind of lazy bigotry that the Alliance is so good at. Yeah, you know what? Quick tangent, I'll get into that. The way the story feels to me, the Horde get a lot of the cartoon villainy, while the Alliance puts a pretty veneer over the much more insidious, corrupt core of villainy. A big example for me, the Jade Forest in the Mist of Pandaria expansion. The Horde's great crimes, like what do that you gotta stop? Rampant eco-terrorism as they callously cut down a sacred grove for their supplies, emergency supplies or no. They cackle as they cut down the trees and, twirl a mustache probably. Then later on they kidnap a bunch of children to use as a bargaining chip. Like seriously, if they had railroad tracks in Pandaria, the Horde would probably be tying damsels to it, right? The Alliance stop it, they get to be big cartoon heroes, and hooray. Meanwhile, on the Horde side, they find the Alliance has happily press-ganged Pandaren into their indentured servitude. Like men, women, and children with no concern or regard for their well-being in what is basically slavery. You know, the kids the Horde kidnapped were fine, a little scared, but fine. The Pandaren you rescue from the Alliance are all so grateful that they can just rest, that they can go see their families again. Like, that's the sort of insidious core that seems to be at the heart of the Alliance to me. But at any rate, I get that they love the game, and I hope that the 28 Playboys do play the Horde, and I hope that they get to see that the bad guys aren't really so bad. That's a terrible line, and I don't know why I left it in here. The rest of this is like a page and a half of Undead puns. So listen, instead, the next time you're thinking, oh, such relatable humans, they're just like me, just remember, you're the mutant offspring of a mechanical space Viking. So relate to that. Thanks. Bye.